What's the next date? What's the next date, people? Something like, oh yeah, it's 1840, the Treaty of Waitangi. The most important treaty ever to be signed on the face of planet Earth. Happened right here in Kaitaia. So, when the assessors put in turning points like the Treaty of Waitangi, that's really weird. But it's also helpful because we get to bring into our argument, like, on the world scale or the New Zealand scale. Because the Treaty of Waitangi might be, the creation of at least, might be one of the most important events in New Zealand history. Because it's led to all this bullshit around it. But in terms of the world, the treaty's only real importance to the world is that it was like the only treaty the British Empire made with natives. Like, it's only important to the world as a kind of like triviality, like what was like a trivia question, you know? But the Treaty of Waitangi was important to New Zealand, but was it a turning point? Was 1840 like the point in time that like started like the New Zealand Wars and like all this stuff? No, because it all happened through like expressions of the treaty, you know? I don't want to talk about the treaty anymore. I've spent so much of this year studying the treaty. It's really interesting, but I'm not talking about it. The next one that I can remember is Kate Shepherd. Once again, a New Zealand one. Did New Zealand women having the vote first really like change the world? Probably not. Once again, it was certainly unique in the world, but I doubt it changed it. Okay, next one, because we're running out of time. I only have 9 minutes left on my recording, and we still have to do the big one. The next one that I can remember is 1929. These turning points really have a big fetish for the nines, don't they? 1929 is the year that Wall Street crashed. I think it's very important, and you can definitely place it as a turning point. It's right there. Wall Street crashed, the world economy goes bleh, and Hitler has the perfect opportunity to use his brilliance to convince Germany he can save them from bankruptcy. Like, you can make a very good argument for that. That economic crash gave Hitler power. And once again, because we're running out of time, I'm not going to discuss why this isn't actually a turning point. So next one. Next one's at the end of World War II, 1945. The nuclear bomb drops, UN is founded, and there is finally peace in Europe. So how could this not be a turning point? You know, like the most devastating weapon known to mankind is created. The biggest humanitarian organization in human history is created, and the worst war humanity has ever seen has finally ended. So let's start with the atomic bomb. John F. Kennedy, during the Cold War, said that humanity stood under a nuclear sword of Damocles, suspended by the thinnest thread. Notice that I remembered that quote off the top of my head. That's the kind of shit I need to do to get this scholarship. But that sword hasn't fallen yet. You know, like, saying that it wasn't a turning point because it never had a huge effect sounds like bullshit, but it's actually the truth. Like, there is a reason that thread never broke. And that makes nuclear weapons a lot less of a big part. Like, sure, if later on nuclear weapons became, like, used and, like, a huge part of our war, then you could argue that it was a big turning point. But instead they just became a big part of our politics. And politics will pick up any tool it needs and use that for politics. Nuclear weapons don't give people, like, economic power, which is what politics is actually based on. Like, the reason Russia and America fought during the Cold War was not really because they had nuclear weapons. They just used the nuclear weapons to politically fight with. It was that they were both really powerful nations economically and, like, spiritually. And you can't even say that the atomic bomb was, like, the biggest, like, scientific turning point of the 20th century, because it wasn't. There's this little thing that happened during World War I that is, like, the biggest scientific turning point in terms of our lives that ever happened. Well, probably not. Fritz Haber, German evil scientist, probably one of the closest people that will ever come to being the true stereotypical evil scientist villain. He says he wants to find a method to produce ammonia to make explosives. And he does it. The guy's a freaking genius. So now people can industrially create ammonia from nitrogen and hydrogen gases in the air. And little would this evil scientist know, this scientific discovery would have some of the biggest humanitarian ramifications of any scientific discovery ever. Because you can use ammonia to fertilize plants. And it turns out ammonia is really good for fertilizing plants. Ammonia is so good at fertilizing plants that the Haber process made by this dude to synthesize ammonia is now estimated to support over half of the world's population. 3.5 billion lives off of this one scientific discovery, when all the atomic bomb has to its name is those populations of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And even if you add the effect on lives from the political turmoil, is nowhere near the Haber process. So you can't argue that something scientific turns history, because science is not subjective. Science just happens, right? An argument I'm going to make in this essay is that we held the world in our hands the moment we decided to let rationality govern our discoveries. And that's true. We had the atomic bomb for a long time because it was only a matter of time until we found it. And it's the same with the Haber process. So what about the UN? The UN's a simple one. You can't just pick 1945 and be like, wow, it changed the world because it formed the UN. Because there are so many things that would have happened between 1945 and now. So many split timelines where one way the UN survives and the other way it doesn't. There are so many things that could have happened after 1945 to define the UN that it makes 1945 meaningless. Once again, it sounds like a bullshit argument, but it's true. Because, and you can also argue that the UN's not even that big a force, you know? Russia has said that the only reason they're even in the UN is because they have veto power. If they didn't have veto power, they wouldn't be there. And if they weren't there, a lot of stuff would go wrong. Because Russia is such a big power. But yeah, the UN isn't defined by 1945. UN had a third of the countries it has now in 1945. UN is defined by the near century of hard work since 1945 that has made it what it is today. Because to be totally honest, back when it very first started, it would not have been influential enough. And peace in Europe. I suppose so. But peace in Europe would have happened no matter what. Wars, by definition, are not sustainable. You know? Whether Germany won or not, there would have been peace in Europe at some point. In that case, the beginning of the war might as well be the turning point, because as a condition of the war starting, there was one day going to be peace again, if you know what I mean. There's only 1.5 minutes of recording time left, so I'm going to leave it there. There's a couple more turning points after 1945 that we're supposed to cover, but I actually know nothing about them. So I'll just quickly do the Berlin Wall, the day the Berlin Wall came down. That's one of them. I don't even know what year it is, who cares. The two I'm doing are the French Revolution and 1945, and let's just say, I dearly hope I know enough. I hope you've enjoyed. I'm not going to enjoy editing this. Bye.